Story 1. I was moving to a new state without a job. I had been selling a few small items online, so I decided to join the local online marketplace group for that state. A woman was offering $40 to anyone who would help her set up for a show during my first weekend there, and I thought that would be a good idea. I showed up, started helping her, and we talked casually. Within 10 minutes of meeting her, I realized she was the mother I never had, as my birth family is extremely abusive. We became friends, and I didn't feel comfortable telling her how I felt because I didn't want to jeopardize a perfectly good friendship. A year into our friendship, while we were having lunch together, she told me that from almost the moment she met me, I was the child she would have had if she hadn't chosen her art career. We had a good cry, adopted each other, and enjoyed a wonderful 13 years of life together before she passed away. During the last 6 years, she lived with me, and I was with her to the end. All of this happened because I responded to an advertisement for $40 in a new state while starting to look for work. Story 2. I was a waitress from 16 to 27. When COVID happened, I was unemployed and bored. I had some extra money from unemployment checks and, despite not finishing high school and being terrible at math, logic, and science, I decided to teach myself coding and other aspects of web development. At that time, I didn't even know how to use Excel. Now, at 32, I own my own company. I am self-employed with 2 employees, and I make more money than I could have ever dreamed of before COVID. I am surprisingly good at it, and if not for that one boredom-fueled decision, I would probably still be waitressing. Additionally, getting out of the restaurant business allowed me to get sober and stay sober, which is another incredibly pivotal decision in my life. Story 3. I decided to pick a fight with my dad over where to eat one night. He had a heart attack, which we later found out was the 3rd in a couple of weeks. He thought he was just having really bad heartburn. About 30 minutes later, I was 15, and the last thing I would have said to him was, "Why are you being so difficult? You never listened to me." This experience really changed how I viewed life and my relationships with others. I'm a lot less angry. Now that his numbers have been consistently good for years, we joked that it was the best thing that happened to both of us. I love my dad so much. Story 4. I was depressed and morbidly obese. One day, I forced myself to go outside and walk around the block. I felt better and started to walk every day. This led me to make more changes in my life, such as eating better and exercising more. I have lost over 75 kilograms and am now at a healthy weight, leading a better lifestyle. Story 5. When I let one of my roommate's cats sleep in my room while my roommate was on vacation, the cat chose me and forced herself into my life. I had never trusted another living being up until that point. I never cared about anything, not even myself. That little cat saved me. Story 6. The small decision I made was to eat instead of going for a bike ride. I used to make shoulder and laptop bags for myself and friends using a machine that belonged to my mother. My grandmother passed away around 2010, and among the things my mother received from her was a manual for a Janome MC 11000 SE. This became my holy grail of machines, but at $9,000, it felt more like a fantasy than anything realistic. Even in my dreams, I couldn't afford that. I got home from work around 6:30 p.m. in November 2016. I planned to go for a bike ride but decided to make dinner and stay home instead. My last shoulder bag was falling apart after 6 years of use, and I needed to make another one. So, I decided to browse Craigslist to see what was available. The 5th listing I found was for the dream machine I mentioned earlier. The seller had it listed for $1,200. I called him and offered $1,000. He accepted without hesitation, as he needed to sell it quickly. I called my friend to see if she could give me a lift since I didn't drive at the time. She agreed and we went together. While there, the seller explained why the machine was so inexpensive. He had until midnight the following day to sell everything, as his mother had passed away, and he needed to clear out the house. While I was there, he offered me another machine for $100, which I purchased and gave to my friend as a thank you for her help. Once I got home with the machine, I went straight to work figuring out how to use it. I quickly realized I couldn't use the touchscreen to draw my own patterns, so I turned to the internet for help. I discovered a few free programs and experimented with them. By the end of the next day, I had created my first patch, a squirrel I designed. I gave it to my friend because it was her favorite animal. I joked with my friend about selling patches on Etsy, and then I thought, why not? By the end of the week, I had come up with several designs and set up a shop. By the end of that week, I made my first sale, and by December, I had earned $40. Fast forward to the fall of 2018, and I was spending every night making patches while working during the day. Anytime I wasn't working, I was caring for my uncle, as I was his caregiver. At that point, I was earning about $250 a month and desperately needed a second machine. I found an advertisement for one that offered 60 months of no interest. The company was legitimate, and the machine I wanted cost $13,000, which came out to about $220 a month, just under what I was making. It gave me a 15-needle commercial machine that was faster and better. I spoke to my uncle, who encouraged me to go big or go home, which was exactly what I wanted to hear. The machine arrived the first week of December, and when they said it weighed 360 pounds, they weren't exaggerating. Getting it onto its stand by myself felt like building the pyramids. I essentially made a series of ramps to lift it to a height where I could slide it onto the stand. By 2020, I was almost matching what I earned at my job, often running it alone for weeks while my boss took time off. The COVID-19 pandemic provided me with a reason to quit, and I never looked back. Now, I'm making nearly double what I did before, have a second machine, and continue to grow. Story 7. Many years ago, we took a flight bump on Christmas Eve and arrived 3 hours later. It was close because we hesitated and almost missed it, as the person behind us wanted the bump. There was probably a 15-second difference between when we arrived at the desk. They offered us $2,500 in Visa gift cards. We used that to splurge on a Disney cruise. We were seated with another family, as is common on cruises, and they taught me about the travel industry they were both in. That friendship led me to start a side hustle, knowing I had a knack for logistics and planning and a passion for Disney travel, the parks, and cruises. Fast forward to nearly a decade later, and that side hustle generates over $1.5 million in annual revenue. This has become my full-time career, allowing me to be my own boss, work from home, and I love it immensely. It gives me time to see the world for work, be fully present as a dad, and live a better quality of life. Thank goodness we decided to take that flight bump. Story 8. I decided to go for it and ask my now wife out when she came into the shop where I worked. I hadn't seen or spoken to her before, but I thought she was attractive, so I asked for her number and got it. 30 years later, we are still together with 2 grown-up kids. Story 9. I stayed with friends for a weekend and shared a drunken kiss with one of them after many drinks. I slept on the couch, and the next morning we had time to say hello and share some innocent cuddles. They headed out for early morning plans, and I didn't get a chance to see them again. Right before I left town, I decided to write them a note that said, "Let's get married," with my number, and put it in the pocket of their jacket hanging up. As it unfolded, we had great phone conversations that turned into weekend trips around the country, leading to the decision to move across the country to give dating a chance. 8 years later, we are married with children. Why I left a note suggesting we should get married after knowing them for 12 hours is still a mystery to me. But I'm glad I did. That was the best decision I've ever made. They changed my life forever, and my world has been better since I took that risk. Leave the note, people. Story 10. I worked in Rochester, New York for a couple of weeks. I was employed by a contractor for Spectrum, which was a disappointing experience. They needed 2 people to drive from Kentucky to Rochester for a project that was scheduled for 2 weeks, possibly longer. I agreed to go. During my time there, I had a pretty decent experience, made good money, and built friendships. A few months later, our workload increased while theirs decreased. 2 employees from Kentucky came to visit, and I introduced them to the local area. At the hotel where they were staying, there was another company involved in the Kentucky Wired project, and they attempted to recruit my colleagues. They provided my contact information while I was job hunting. I spoke with them and began working for their company, which is based in San Antonio. They were not enjoying the winter in Kentucky, but we persevered. I started learning about fiber line work and other fiber optic technologies. As the project in Rochester concluded, they wanted me to relocate to Texas. I agreed, and my wife and I moved in March 2020. It was challenging, but I was considered essential as I maintained critical communication infrastructure. I eventually left that company and found my current job. Now, I am earning the best salary of my life, living in a town I enjoy, and becoming healthier. I hike weekly, go climbing for work or indoor rock climbing a couple of times a week, have a regular doctor, good friends, and more. Moving to Texas has been a blessing for my wife and me, though I fully admit this is not the case for many others. Story 11. Deciding to buy a kayak. I realized I would need an easy way to access a river. I also decided I wanted to paddle year-round, which meant moving to British Columbia from Alberta. This required finding a new job. Since British Columbia is expensive, it also meant leaving my cozy desk job and returning to academia. In November, I was a program coordinator in Edmonton, spending most of my time indoors. In July, I was an assistant professor in British Columbia, spending Tuesday and Thursday nights taking an introductory kayaking course on the kayak I bought in Edmonton. Story 12. I decided to reapply for a job I interviewed for 6 months prior and didn't get. I had been unemployed for over a year at that point and thought, what's the worst that can happen? They called me in for an interview again. I, of course, agreed, despite needing to travel 10 hours by bus to get to an in-person interview. I ended up getting the job this time. I found out I was a close second the first time. It was right before getting evicted because my landlord sold the building, and I have now been working here for 7 months. It's a well-paying job for my first one out of graduate school and has allowed me to regain a lot of self-confidence that had been lost during my 15-month bout of unemployment. I've made a few really good friends and am experiencing financial security for the first time in my life. Always apply for jobs that interest you or that you think you are almost qualified for, because you never know when they might work out. Story 13. I was supposed to go on a date with a guy I had been talking to on Hinge, but he had to cancel on the day of due to not feeling well. I had a strict rule that if a guy canceled on me last minute, he didn't get a second chance, so when he asked if we could reschedule, I almost said no. I figured I was about to move in a few weeks, and he had already canceled on me. However, I decided to give him another chance, and we went out the next night. A little over 3 years later, I'm married to him. Story 14. Staying in Germany while on holiday. I was lost, dealing with difficult situations and associating with the wrong people. I went to Germany for a 3-week holiday and loved it. I decided to tear up my return ticket and handle things. I stayed there for 4 years, and it was the best time of my life. I truly believe it was what I needed to completely turn my life around. And life is good. Story 15. I had a virtual introductory chat scheduled one morning with a man regarding a potential opportunity. That morning, my boyfriend and I had a disagreement, and I was very upset. I drafted an email to cancel the chat, but before sending it, I washed my face and decided to go ahead with the call. This conversation kickstarted my career and led me into an industry I love and where I am thriving. Story 16. I decided to go with my 2 best friends to a going-away party for a guy they knew. I only knew my 2 friends, and it made no sense for me to go. But I was young, adventurous, and decided to tag along. I ended up playing beer pong with the brother of the guy moving away. When we first locked eyes, I knew he would be someone special to me. Love at first sight? I don't know about that, but something clicked. I found out later he didn't drink. He just wanted to talk to me. We have now been married for almost 9 years, moved to 4 cities in 2 states, have 2 dogs, and our first baby is on the way. He is the best person I have ever known. Story 17. When I decided to talk to a person from college, it changed everything. Not only did it change my mindset, but we traveled together. I learned another language, and I lived through so many experiences that I hadn't imagined until I met him. It's amazing to realize that a small action can change everything. Story 18. In 2021, my sister had a baby at 19 and continued to work. During that time, I was homeschooling because of COVID-19, so I watched my niece while in my junior year of high school, which I eventually completed. In my senior year, I returned to school but caught COVID-19. Since my mom was high risk, I decided to officially homeschool for my senior year, which was frustrating because I wanted to graduate with my classmates from elementary school. I would watch my niece in the mornings while my sister worked, and after my sister finished work, I would go to my job. I was incredibly tired during the day, which affected my ability to complete my schoolwork. I started taking birth control pills in 2020, and those contributed to my developing depression and anxiety. I would sleep whenever I had the chance, and I was constantly taking care of my niece every day and night. I asked my sister for help with my schoolwork since I was helping her with my niece, but she was unwilling to assist and became upset when my niece started calling me Mom. My niece would cry to be with me because she was so accustomed to my constant presence. As a result of not completing my schoolwork, I never received my diploma. I struggle with feelings of inadequacy because everyone I know is advancing in life, while I feel stuck. I had a deadline to finish my work, but my sister didn't help me. I gained acceptance into NASCAR Technical Institute, the school I have always wanted to attend to work on pit crews. At orientation, the people I saw are now on pit crews, while I find myself without a job or a diploma. I regret letting things get to this point. We had a significant fight in October 2024, and she blamed me for failing at life. That day, I contemplated ending everything. Yet, to this day, I still watch my niece. I plan to leave soon to get my life back on track, as my circumstances have impacted my entire life. I love my niece deeply. Story 19. I drove 3.5 hours to a zoo to see and photograph the cheetahs run. I noticed a man with a lot of camera equipment, approached him, and asked about his camera settings. I continued to visit the zoo over the next several years, where I would see him nearly every trip. Initially just because he was always there, and later to meet up intentionally. The cheetah show also kicked off the reception for our wedding 9 years ago. Story 20. I forgot to recertify for public assistance. I went to a doctor's appointment, only for them to tell me my Medicaid is unavailable. I said, "Wait, that can't be right." So I called, and 2 days earlier my case had closed. I had to do the whole process all over again. About a month later, I found out that I have a housing voucher. The city will pay my rent for up to 5 years. Story 21. During my freshman fall semester of college, my psychology professor canceled class, so I decided to sleep in for an extra hour before my math class. I then went to breakfast in the dining hall an hour later than my usual time. That was the time my now husband and his best friend usually ate breakfast. I ended up asking for their numbers, and I started dating my now husband 12 days after we met. We have been together for 6.5 years and married for almost 2. Story 22. Back when I was in high school, my older sibling introduced my younger brother and me to RuneScape. I didn't play seriously at the time, but played on and off. 2 instances in those early years really shaped my future. The first was when I was killed in the wilderness and lost gold and runes that meant a lot to my account. I quit for months and almost didn't come back. The second was when a friend in the game lent me a dragon hatchet to train with. At that time, there was no in-game system to safely lend items. It was all about trust. My younger brother urged me to block this friend, whom I had known since before my near quit due to my death in the wilderness, and keep the hatchet for myself. I refused and prioritized the friendship over the in-game item. Fast forward several years, and I discovered that this friend actually had a crush on me. We didn't start dating right away, but within a few months, we began having voice calls and participating in our daily in-game activities together. We spent a lot of time together, and I realized that his friendship meant more to me. This September marks our 9th wedding anniversary. We both still play the old-school RuneScape version of the game in a group with friends, and even attended the RuneFest convention in London in 2017 to celebrate our first wedding anniversary. If I had quit or blocked my now husband, I would have a very different life. Story 23. I spoke to a random girl in college. We were both freshmen looking for a required science class. She was an education major and I was a psychology and business major. None of our core classes would intersect. We sat next to each other, and I am still great friends with her almost 20 years later. Story 24. I inadvertently signed up for the wrong economics class and ended up in an econometrics course that was very heavy on math and game theory. I kind of liked math, so I thought I could handle it and decided not to drop it. I had never worked that hard in any other class and had to learn some mathematics that I had never seen before, but I absolutely loved the subject. I discovered that I have a real aptitude for mathematics, particularly game theory and logic. I've had a unique career path, but it's been a very fun ride. Story 25. I decided to ask a man at the festival if he wanted to share a bottle of Jägermeister with me. He agreed, and now I live on the other side of the world with him. I am truly the happiest I have ever been. Story 26. I don't even know. I don't think anything has been substantial. Maybe deciding to buy a house for my daughter to live in. She hurt me badly. It was not a small decision. I seemed to make significant mistakes. Story 27. I randomly slid into a girl's Instagram messages 10 years ago. We have been together ever since and have 3 children now. We have traveled the country together. Story 28. Swiped right with the intent of trying to get laid. Now I live 3,000 miles away from where I was. I gave up a successful business, I have a completely different job, and the woman who catalyzed all of it has passed away. So I am alone again, like a ship without a port. Story 29. I opened the door to my friend's brother's room at a party around 5 a.m. We spent the night talking, but nothing happened. We always liked each other and had a huge crush on each other, but we missed each other for a good 5 years. After that night, I ended an unsuccessful relationship, hoping for something new with my friend's brother. I think he felt the same way, but it quickly became clear that nothing would come of it. A few months later, I met my current fiancé. He is the one. We live together and are expecting a baby. I know I would have never met him, and I would never have had the courage to end that first relationship if I hadn't opened that door. Even though I was initially very upset that things didn't work out with my friend's brother, I now realize that he played a role in my life. He helped free me from that past relationship so that I could meet my fiancé. Story 30. I started watching the anime Bleach, which got me thinking about a cool original character. I made a lot of friends on a Bleach role-playing site. Eventually, one of them recommended Rooster Teeth to me. I checked it out and enjoyed the content. I became active in the community and made some friends. 2 of them became close friends, and we all moved in together and split rent. I've never been happier. If I hadn't watched Bleach, I might not be alive today, or if I were, I have no idea what I would be doing now, all because of one anime. Story 31. When I was 16, I skipped school to hang out with my best friend at her new school. A guy she barely knew was immediately attracted to me, so she introduced us. He tried really hard to stay in contact with me over the years, even though we rarely hung out. Little did I know how big of a crush he had on me, but he never said anything. Nearly 20 years later, everything was finally revealed. After more random coincidences, we miraculously reconnected. Now we are happily in love and living together after he helped me get out of an abusive relationship. It has only been official for 3 months, but it seriously feels like a lifetime. The transition just felt so effortless and right, yet it was heavily overdue. Story 32. Saturday, April 17th, 2004, 6 p.m. I am on my way to a date with a girl I have been chatting with online. I have to change trains, but I missed my connecting train, and now there is a 30-minute wait. I am so nervous, and ordinarily, this delay would have been an excuse to call it off and go home. Instead, I text her to explain what happened, but that I am still coming. She turned out to be my soulmate and for the next 20 years was the only woman for me. Story 33. I went to the skating rink with my best friend the summer after 8th grade. That led to years of skating, my first kiss, my high school friend group, and my college-age friend group. Indirectly, everything in my life from that moment on was due to that one day of skating. Story 34. I went to a college to inquire about a course, as they did not have much information on the website. They placed me in a room with an aggressive salesman. Before I knew it, I had been convinced to enroll in internet and network security, as if entering the field of information technology with a diploma instead of a degree would make my life easier. Story 35. I took a language class in college and had to go to an ethnic restaurant for an assignment. The owner offered me a job. I divorced my husband because he wouldn't help me with anything, then dated the owner, who was abusive. I left and found myself in the same situation again. Eventually, I gave up my career to escape that. Story 36. My story isn't crazy. The choice didn't lead me down some extraordinary path, but it was a choice that was a fork in the road. During my junior year of high school, I was accepted into a pre-college program at the state college about an hour away. A free summer semester and housing were available if you paid for it. Looking back, it's clear it was mostly marketing. I had done no planning for college and had no idea how they found me. Anyway, my family wanted me to go. I would have been the first in my entire family to attend college. So I went to this program. That's where I ended up going to college since I was technically already approved. I was still in contact with the people from that program, and applying was mostly just a formality. That led me down the path of my major and my career. It introduced me to people who would become lifelong friends. I met my first serious girlfriend in college but didn't date until later because my best friend, who I met in college, moved to a certain city after graduation. I also moved there when I graduated and wasn't finding work locally. That is still where I live over 20 years later. Story 37. I spontaneously sent a job application to a prominent game development company that I admire while searching for my first job. I received a positive response, followed by encouraging feedback from the interview and test project. At that time, I was already pursuing a career in software development but lacked the confidence to transition into game development, which has always been my main area of interest. This experience provided the significant boost I needed to commit to my passion, and many years later, I am still thriving in this field. Story 38. During my first year of law school, I was still a smoker. As my last class let out for the day, a friend met me outside the building to head to a bar around the corner for drinks. As we finished our cigarettes, a guy I vaguely knew from class walked over from the conversation he had been having and asked for a cigarette. He heard us talking about grabbing drinks and asked if he could join us. I looked over at the girl he had walked away from to come our way and said, "Only if you bring her. We have been together for 17 or 18 years, married for 12, and have 2 children." Story 39. Accepting a friend's invitation for my buddy and me to try surfing was one of the best decisions of my life. I took to it like a fish to water, which has enriched my life in many ways. Story 40. I casually asked a coworker about her new job and who she would be working with. Jokingly, I inquired whether they were hiring as well. We exchanged contact information before she left, as she was going to implement software that we used internally at our workplace. I was the resident expert on that software. About 4 months later, she called me to see if I was interested in a new job. I do basically the same work I've always done, but now for a variety of clients, earning more than double what I made before, following a few promotions. I like to think our conversation was serendipitous, as it may have led her to reach out to me. Story 41. I whimsically signed up for an international scholarship while applying everywhere. Despite having a low GPA and a history of struggling in school, they favored the underdog, and I ended up attending graduate school in Japan, where the reasonable cost of living, along with my hard work, allowed me to save enough money for a deposit on a home when I returned, despite having no generational wealth or realistic chances of achieving that. Story 42. Conocí a una persona a través de un anuncio que publiqué para rentar un cuarto, del cual me iba a mudar. Después, nos hicimos amigos. El año pasado, por circunstancias, se mudó a donde vivo. Me ha hecho la vida imposible y ahora no sé cómo hacer que se vaya. Me arrepiento de haberla conocido. Story 43. During a course of 5 months, I lost 3 friends, 5 former classmates, and 4 family members who passed away or experienced a stroke or cardiac arrest. My consumption of bacon, greasy foods, and salty ramen decreased to almost once every other month. Story 44. I swiped right on my abusive ex. Took me over 7 years to leave the relationship. However, I now have a wonderful child. I have made amazing friends, discovered a sport that has become a lifelong passion, and learned about boundaries. Story 45. My wife and I met on a dating site and both clearly stated our intent to simply hook up. Our son just turned 6 months old, and we are in the house we bought together. It was a great experience. Story 46. I decided I needed a new hobby after getting out of an abusive marriage. I felt like all my friends were tied to my ex, and I needed new people in my life. I wanted to go somewhere and meet people who didn't know me as my ex's wife and my whole story. Making friends is challenging as an adult. I spent a few months at the beach in a van to heal after my divorce. I was practically a recluse and just needed to recover. One day, I went into a local pub near the beach to use the bathroom and saw a flyer for poker tournaments. I had never played poker before in my life, but I thought, I can do that. It can't be too hard, right? I spent the afternoon reading the rules for Texas Hold'em in my car by the beach, and that night, I attended my first $20 buy-in tournament at the local pub. There were only a couple of tables, but everyone was so lovely. No one knew me and was happy to talk about anything. It turned out my town had a thriving poker scene with many games at different pubs. By the end of the night, I walked away with a new hobby, and I actually won the tournament. It was exactly what my confidence needed. It helped me regain my self-esteem and ignited a passion for poker in my life. A few games later, I met the man who became my best friend and later my loving husband. That one flyer in a random pub has given me a beautiful life with a new hobby I excel at, friends for life, and opened the door for me to meet my soulmate. I walked into that pub a little over 4 years ago, and I'm glad I said, why not give it a go? Because that small decision changed everything for me. Just be open to new experiences. You never know where those little choices can take you. Story 47. I was late going to work in Lower Manhattan on a bright fall day in 2001. I was so late that I missed the towers being hit and went straight back home. Story 48. I took my first teaching job for 5th grade students in an inner-city low-income area. It was 2020 during COVID, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was tough all around, and I immediately knew teaching wasn't for me long-term. A coworker at my school told me about a master's degree in technology she had. I looked into it and, during my first year, applied for graduate school. I quickly learned my graduate degree was unique because I could get a corporate job and leave teaching in instructional design. I immediately researched this new field, and after graduating, I resigned from teaching after 3 years. In 5 months, I got a corporate job with a $15,000 pay raise from teaching. I received another pay raise this year, and let's just say if I were still in teaching, I would be making significantly less and be unhappy. My new job is boring, and I miss the kids, but I love getting paid for my time and not feeling burnout every day. Story 49. I was a student pilot attending an air show. I stumbled upon a booth promoting a magazine for pilots. The editor was there, and without thinking, I said, "What your magazine needs is a student column written by a skilled female pilot." Really? He replied with a sardonic grin. "Can you write? Try me," I said. He gave me his card. A week later, my partner asked, "Are you going to email that editor?" Nah. I think I made a bit of a fool of myself. Just do it. So I opened my laptop to email him, only to find an email from him saying, "Hello, skilled female pilot. Where's that copy you promised me?" I wrote the copy, he loved it, I was given the column, and 2 years later, I had his job as editor after he retired. I remain an editor for a larger, more popular magazine to this day. Story 50. Probably last year when I was sick and had just turned 26. I passed gas and shouldn't have trusted it because I accidentally soiled myself a little. I realized I am getting older and have been trying to be more careful with my body when I'm unwell. Story 51. I lost my debit card in another state, which led to an unexpected detour. I ended up changing my course completely. Story 52. I foolishly went to a Christmas party with a date I didn't want to be with because I believed the love of my life didn't want to be with me. I should have stayed home and knocked on her door to tell her I love her and I don't want to live without her. Story 53. I decided to be intimate on a first date for the first time. 10 years later, I moved with that partner across the country to a place completely different from where I grew up. Story 54. I was a couple of years out of college, working my first full-time salaried office job that utilized my degree. It was in my hometown, but I had always dreamed of moving to Nashville and just never knew how to make it happen. I had an awful boss, and I still have nightmares about her to this day. I had a good amount of money saved up and decided to quit the job without anything else lined up. After a couple of months of unsuccessful job searching, I took a position at Starbucks, which looking back, is still one of the best jobs I have ever had. A coworker of mine was married to a service member who was getting deployed, and I overheard her discussing with our boss how she was going to transfer to a Starbucks across the country, closer to her family while he was gone. I thought, wait, you can do that? I had a friend whose husband was stationed about an hour outside of Nashville, so one day I asked if I could move in with her, transfer to a Starbucks there, and use her address to apply for jobs. She said yes. A few months later, I did it, and within a month of living there, I got jobs at two of my dream places and met some of my best friends. If I had not had that terrible boss, I probably would have never left the job, or at least not when I did, because the pay and hours were good. If I had not worked at Starbucks, I would not have been able to move when and how I did. Story 55. I decided to travel to another country for a month by myself. You learn a lot about yourself when you are in a situation with no one to rely on. No family, no friends. It wasn't easy, but it was an enriching experience. Story 56. Choosing a hostel to stay at in Ireland for a 3-week Europe backpacking trip with my best friend. We switched from one hostel to another because they offered breakfast. I met my future husband there, and we have been married for 7 years, expecting a baby in 2 months. Story 57. I decided to switch colleges between school years and moved a few hours away from where I grew up. It has made a complete turnaround for me. I am now engaged, have a stable job, and am finishing school soon. I rent a beautiful house, have an amazing dog, and the best support group of friends and church support I've ever had. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.